After the first India-England test, where the hosts have managed to crash and burn, or if I'm allowed a terrible pun at the top of the recording, they've managed to crash and turn, a lot of focus is going to be on the condition of the pitches for the rest of the 5-match series between India and England. So today, to talk about that, we'll have our colleague Rahul Pandey joining us. This, as always, is me, Amit Kamath. Joining me is my co-host of the Game Time podcast, Mihir Vasavda. Rahul, welcome to the show. As I mentioned at the top, we wanted to talk a little bit about the condition of the pitches. For our listeners, we'd just like to give a heads up that we are recording this on Thursday when the test match has technically not begun, but you are going to be listening to this on the third day of the test match, the second test. Rahul, as our guest for the episode, we'd like to ask you for a prediction. What are you expecting from the pitch for the second test?
Thanks, Amit Bhai. I think it wouldn't be surprising if India go with the same sort of wicket again, given the fact, that, they, despite Ravindra Jadeja's absence, do have a quality spin attack. And despite, the fact that their batters weren't able to handle England's spinners that well in that last innings, it only makes sense for them to continue with the same, because that was what Rahul Dravid sort of hinted after the first test, that, we have world-class spinners who've faced a similar sort of test before, even though they haven't that many times, but that is a point of discussion for, later in the podcast, I guess. So, yeah, pretty much expecting a wicket that sort of starts turning from day one itself and gets even tougher to bat on as the day progresses. Also, given the fact that there haven't been that many test matches in that part of the country or on that ground where we're going to see the second test match.
Well, having a pitch like that, Mihir, is going to be a bit of a banana peel in a sense, because in the first test we saw that, India went into the end of the first innings with a hefty lead, and somehow, despite having, I think they were 42 for 0 at one stage in the second innings, somehow they contrived to be their own worst nightmare and ended up losing the first test by 28 runs. Mir, how tricky is this decision going to be to, not go for a out-and-out turning track, and rather than that, having some amount of moderation in the pitch?
A disclaimer first. Just because they've lost the first test does not mean that, they'll keep on losing, and if it's a big issue. Rahul might be aware of the exact stat, but in the last 10 years, they haven't lost a series, right, Rahul? Or they have lost only 3 or 4 test matches. So, clearly it's working for them, this strategy. The problem is that you have a bunch of cricketers now who I personally feel, keen to know what you guys think about it, aren't really gifted or equipped to play, to bat on pitches that turn square. So someone like a Jack Leach, who's perhaps
put India on a leash.
He's not a spinner of Vaughan or McGill, or even like a Monty Panesar was made to look great on Indian pitches, right?
Wait, are you saying Monty Panesar is not great?
Look at what he's done elsewhere outside India. So, I'm not saying he's not great, but he's certainly not a Kumble or a Harbhajan, not in that league.
Murli.
Or Jadeja for that matter, right? So, average spinners ke samne ye log tik nahi paaye. That is my bigger problem. And I understand that they are playing to their strengths at home, perceived strengths at least. But on the other hand, what I feel is, rather than actually playing to their strength, right? They feel that they're playing to their strength, which is spin. But they are trying to play on the opposition's weaknesses over here. They're trying to kind of make the most of the fact that perhaps the visiting side, England in this case, they won't be able to tackle the spin. And in the process, they're forgetting 2 things, that they have perhaps one of the most feared pace attacks right now in world cricket. And also at the same time that their batsmen perhaps might not be, good enough to handle whatever is that they're trying to throw at the others. So that's my problem actually over there.
Not good enough, huh? Rahul, would you agree with what Mihir is saying? Are Indian batters maybe less equipped to handle square turning pitches, despite whatever the rest of the world might think are what India's strengths are?
It's funny because, first test match in India's first innings, I think it was, when a couple of wickets fell in quick succession on day 2, I guess. The camera panned to Rahul Dravid and he was seen taking notes, the Indian batters getting out to spin bowling. Here is a head coach who during his playing days used to rule the roost in those kind of conditions, who used to save test matches for India, win test matches for India in those conditions. But such is the sort of hilarious nature of our sport that even under his coaching, India are really facing this issue. And it's not something that just restricted to us in India, but everyone elsewhere, I guess, also knows the fact that Indian batters right now aren't, playing spinners that well. The issue sort of also goes to their best batters. Virat Kohli was struggling against left arm spinners for quite a while. He hasn't played that many test matches for us to, believe that he's probably gotten over that sort of drought or that matchup, which was more favorable to left arm spinners against him. Also, Rohit Sharma, who was India's best batter perhaps in their last big test series at home against Australia, took his time, scored that big 100 in the first match itself. But what we saw of Rohit Sharma in the first match was this aggressive avatar of Rohit Sharma, which we saw during the ODI World Cup as well. Perhaps he hasn't got out of that zone, which India desperately need him to, because the problem here is, you have 2 to 3 batters in that lineup who haven't played that many test matches. Shreyas Iyer, for all his experience, which is certainly more than Shubman Gill and Yashasvi Jaiswal's in white ball cricket, he hasn't played that many test matches at home. And now, all of a sudden, post the Cheteshwar Pujara and Ajinkya Rahane era, which we can call it right now, I think these batters are finding it difficult to sort of get tuned to that pitch, to those conditions, and to even bowlers like Jack Leach, who haven't bowled that much in those conditions, getting the better of them. So I think, that's a big test. And I think, obviously the big question, which I think, I don't know if we can do it justice by just talking about it on this podcast for just 5 minutes, perhaps, is the absence of first-class matches that these players are playing right now. Rahul Dravid said this very interesting thing that it's not like we're picking these guys out of nowhere. They've come in, they've played those matches at domestic level and done the hard work, which he sort of said after the first test match. But if you look at the stats of how many first-class matches Shubman Gill, Shreyas Iyer or Yashasvi Jaiswal have played in the last few months, Jaiswal I think we can discount because he's just starting at the international scene. But if you see it, the number of first-class matches someone like a Gill or Iyer have played over the last few months, and if you see the number of matches that they've played, which have been on wickets as conducive to spin as these are, I think you'll find the reason as to why India are failing in these matches against certain bowlers.
Rahul, you mentioned Rohit Sharma over there, and my mind goes back to something he said last year after I think they lost to Australia in Indore, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah,
that was, I think, their only the third defeat in the last decade. I think they'd lost in Pune 2017, in Chennai 2021, Indore back then, and this is the fourth defeat now which they suffered in Hyderabad. And Rohit Sharma, I think, was asked after the test match back then in Indore, and I mean, just about the pitch and if the plan is backfiring. And his answer was very interesting because he said that these are the kind of pitches they want to play on, and he clearly sees it as the team's strength. And that's an interesting take for the simple reason that we discussed earlier. But the fact that they aren't looking at perhaps from the point of view that they've lost a test match as much as from the fact that they have won a lot more. They've won many times more than they've lost. So I think that gives them the confidence. They don't mind an odd defeat if they're winning the series. But going forward, I don't know how much this will kind of be of impact. I mean, will you keep on producing batsmen who will be kind of having the skill to maneuver the ball on turning tracks? If, you produce bowlers like Ravindra Jadeja and Akshar Patel and Ashwin, who will keep on spinning and troubling the visiting batsmen. So these are the two questions which I'm not talking about the ongoing series, but say 2 or 3 years down the line. I mean, how successful this strategy will be in long term is something that I'm really keen to know because, whatever said and done, cycles आते जाते रहते हैं, and कैसे इन्हें adapt करेंगे वो I think एक बड़ा question है.
I think Mihir bhai, just to expand on that a little bit before we move on, it's interesting that आप वो Indore test match याद कर रहे हैं where Rohit Sharma said that, because immediately after India played in Ahmedabad and they produced an absolute belter for batters, which was very much in contrast to the first 3 pitches in the series. Just when, Australia sniffed that they can probably level a test series in India, the strategy was changed in that last test match, which was, by some of the pundits in our country said as to a master move ahead of the WTC final, because India ko wahan par spin friendly wicket nahi milne wala tha, but they also didn't get a batting friendly wicket at the Oval. So, yeah, I think, a couple of times, the address from the management has been kind of not clear, if for lack of a better word. I think samajh mein nahi aaya at times ke under the regime of Rohit Sharma and Rahul Dravid, if the team, obviously the win at Lords, the win at Gaba, they're only 3 years back, but I think ye team kafi change ho chuki hai uske baad se. Yeah, and one of the things that everyone has asked that, even Michael Vaughan pointed out the other day is whether they have that killer instinct left in them, which a certain Virat Kohli sort of instilled in this team.
Rahul, I think a lot of questions have also been asked of Rohit's captaincy. You mentioned, Michael Vaughan. Even Jeff Boycott has, taken aim at Rohit, saying that he's 37, he's past his best, probably shouldn't be, captaining India. But I also wanted to ask you, while we are talking about whether Rohit is too old to lead the Indian team or too old to even be part of the Indian team, should we have persisted with the two old war horses, Rahane and Pujara? Because they seem to have a much better idea of how to play on these sort of conditions. I know the Indian batting coach, Vikram Rathore, yesterday came out and very comically tried to say that, the Yashasvi Jaiswal, Shreyas Iyers and Shubman Gills of the world deserve more time. We need to give them more patience and things like that. Whereas the rest of the world has been arguing that they've been given way too much time to begin with. Not Yashasvi maybe, but the rest of the two. Rahul, where do you weigh in on this? Should we have maybe given the other two that are not part of the Indian squad a slightly longer rope, or should we continue with the longer rope that we've given the two that are in the 11?
I think for one, the team was considering to bring them back. Rohit said before the series that, we were looking at a certain senior player to replace when Virat said he won't be part of the first 2 test matches, to replace him, but then persisted with someone young, because his point was, if we don't make them bat on these wickets, they'll never learn. Perhaps, a transition has to happen at some time. And that being said, of course, Pujara, his first-class record. Man has scored more than 20,000 runs in first-class cricket. There are only less than a dozen people who have done that in Indian cricket. So those credentials kind of, answer the question itself. But I think what India are trying to do here is, go into that transition phase, but they're also not quite sure if this is the foolproof plan they want to go into Australia with. They have a 5 test match series at the end of the year in Australia. Someone like a Pujara has incredible record in Australia. The last 2 test series that we won in Australia were because of him, because of the number of balls he batted. But I think, even though we would want him to be part of this team in the ongoing WTC cycle, given the shortcomings that have been seen of Shreyas Iyer or Shubman Gill in the middle order. I think Gill, who it was said that wanted to bat in the middle order last year, he was our opener, remember, not that long ago. But last year it was said that Gill wanted to be a middle order batter, wanted to bat at number 3, so that Yashasvi Jaiswal could come in as an opener. I think he hasn't really found that role or made that role his own. So in the midst of a year, India have to play 14, 15 test matches. Their batting order isn't quite in place to, say, face a team like England, who have found themselves more at home than India. So yeah, I would very much want Pujara more so than Rahane to come back into this team, but I don't think that door is quite open at the moment, given what Rohit said at the very start of the series.
यार बट राहुल इसमें थोड़ा सा फॉर द लैक ऑफ अ बेटर वर्ड हम थोड़ा सा इसमें डबल स्टैंडर्ड्स फिर नहीं करते हैं, बिकॉज ऑन वन हैंड जब भी हम T20 टीम को देखें एंड वी से कि यार रोहित एंड विराट शुड नॉट बी देयर बिकॉज देयर आर सो मेनी यंगस्टर्स वेटिंग इन द लाइन एंड दे शुड बी गिवन अ चांस, एंड आई एम नॉट टॉकिंग अबाउट लॉन्गर रोप ओवर हियर, बट दे शुड बी गिवन अ चांस. एट द सेम टाइम देयर इज राणे एंड पुजारा. अगर जो टेक्निकली देखे तो इट्स द सेम थिंग. वेल उनका भी मतलब वैसे देखे तो समय इन अ वे तो आ ही गया है, काफी उनको मौके भी मिले और ऑल दोस थिंग्स. एंड जब यू हैव बैट्समैन, I know that Shubman Gill isn't young anymore. He's traveled all over the world now. He's played in India, South Africa, Australia, I think England too. So he's played everywhere. But मतलब फुटबॉल मैनेजर तो नहीं है ये कि आप अगर जो 2 साल में कोई टाइटल नहीं जीते तो फिर आपको बाहर निकाल दिया जाएगा. So मतलब मुझे वो वाला एक चीज समझ में नहीं आ रहा कि that lack of patience with young players is something that confounds me. अगर जो हम एक साइड पे कह रहे हैं and I don't know about Virat, but Rohit certainly looks the part when it comes to T20 still. So then on one hand, if people are gunning for his head in the T20 team, then at the same time, वही logic हमें tests में भी apply करना चाहिए, I feel.
True.
Maybe not so much. I think Test and T20 are such different formats that the demands for both are slightly different maybe. Like अगर आप T20 में है and you are playing even at 120 का strike rate, I think it is still too slow maybe, depending on what position you are coming in. But Test matches, you have to have some sort of a... मतलब the way we saw, I think the numbers were that these three guys, Yashasvi Jaiswal, Shreyas Iyer and Shubman, between the three of them, they scored 151 runs in the 6 innings of the first test. And वो 151 runs में से 80 runs तो यशस्वी ने पहले innings में बना दिए थे. So you just take that out, 5 innings में आपके पास इतना ये है. The other thing is कि, see, Pujara is still doing well at the Ranji Trophy. He's recently...
He'll be playing in Solapur while the team is in Vizag, so yeah.
Yeah. So my thing is maybe these two formats have maybe two different... I mean, I understand थोड़ा सा hypocrisy भी है अगर आप एक तरह से बोल रहे हो कि these guys are too old to play in a certain format, दूसरे तरफ आप बोल रहे हो कि these guys are not too old to be playing in this. But maybe the different formats in itself are slightly... One is unforgiving, one is slightly more amenable.
I don't know. Rahul, you were saying something?
Message क्या जा रहा है to the player is a point that we somehow miss at times when we look at the big picture of the sport, that is. Because, last year, around about the same time, I was covering the Delhi-Mumbai Ranji match. And you remember the build-up whose time pay domestic season was about to happen. India ka Australia squad was about to be announced. Everyone was saying that, finally Sarfaraz Khan, he has to make the cut now. The man has been moving shoulder to shoulder with one great Don Bradman when it comes to first-class average. What more does he have to do to get a chance at least in a test match at home? And, now that chance has come, I remember his words when he was, snubbed the last time. He said, "Ke yaar, ab itne run bana liye hain maine, ke it's sort of the only thing that I can do." Which kind of brings us to this point. Abhi jo T20 World Cup ko leke bhi, all of what's happened in the last 1 month, right? 14 months, there's no Virat, no Rohit in the T20 side. Then all of a sudden you play the last T20 series before the World Cup and you have both of them back in the series. Which is, I think, kind of injustice to the players who were part of that unit at that point of time. Because a player who goes into so many series under the impression that, this is all in the build-up to a T20 World Cup, I think it's not justice to them if you then, remove them from the picture. Same goes for Test cricket. If they are trying to give these young players an opportunity, or these inexperienced players, if they cannot be called young players now, an opportunity in the side, then they should probably give them a longer rope. I guess, it will be sad to see them, go back to the old strategy and sort of, remove them if the results aren't in their favor in 1 or 2 series.
Absolutely. But Rahul, having said that, do you think Shubman basically is somebody who's fighting for his spot in the second test? Because once the third test comes around, Virat Kohli finally comes back into the team and the only player maybe making way has to be Shubman. If he does not score the big runs in the second test, he's out.
I certainly think no one is sort of safe or with their role or their position in the sport after what happened to KL Rahul in that last India-Australia series. I mean, 1 second he was the vice captain of the team and then he's dropped from the series entirely. So, we've seen this management take some harsh calls midway through the series. And I certainly think that Shubman knows that. He's had too big a sample size, maybe not all of it in Test cricket. He had a wonderful start to the year, scored 100 in all formats. By March, he had a Test 100 to his name. He had a couple of ODI 100s. He even had a T20 100. But then, the second half of the year wasn't as consistent as, the year started out, which is understandable. If you're playing that many games, you can't be consistent. But now that India find themselves at a tricky juncture, in a 5 test match series, if you lose 1 test, it's okay, you can still make a comeback. But if you lose the second test as well, then what you see all of a sudden is, for the first time, India trailing 2-0 at a home series in God knows how long. So that'll be interesting to see. And I think, Virat coming back, you also have interesting options in Rajat Patidar and Sarfaraz Khan. India might want to try them as well if things aren't going well with the top 5 batters. So I think, Shubman may eventually lose out on his spot if there isn't a 50 or a good, well-made 100 in this next test match.
Yeah, and this will come out on the third day of the test match. So who knows? By then, either he might be out on a duck or 100. So anything can happen in these 3 days. But I agree with the whole point. I think we'd mentioned it even when we'd done the pod on Virat and Rohit's inclusion in the T20 team, and the energy that Virat brings, right? I think वो बहुत बड़ा factor है. I mean, in the first test, I was just amazed to see कि कितने time के लिए India's body language was flat. There was no one to kind of lift the team up. Barmy Army was making more noise than the Indian fans, even though they were totally outnumbered in the stadium. अगर जो विराट होता तो I doubt he would have let that happen. वो कुछ ना कुछ either to lift the spirits of the players on the field, or even to get the crowd kind of engaged थोड़ा सा, he would have constantly done something. And I think as much as his batting, I think ये वाला एक बहुत बड़ा factor है, which he's the only one who can bring it. I don't think Rohit, I mean, we can all be very split with his captaincy and everything, but on this point I think he's not at the same level as Virat. I mean, the body language and all does matter a lot, especially when you're leading the team, and I don't think he's kind of getting full marks on that front.
So another player India are missing who used to bring a lot to these matches is Rishabh Pant. Not just because of his batting, which is obviously a big factor when India were playing on that tricky surface in South Africa. I remember thinking, what would Rishabh Pant have done on this kind of a wicket? And same goes in that second innings when wickets were falling and India needed to chase some 230. I think Rishabh Pant would have just gone about that baseball thing. What's baseball? I've been doing this since 2018 and England was the first team I did this against. So, him just being on the field as a wicket keeper also, I think Radio Rishabh Pant isn't given much credit for India's success at home. That chatterbox behind the stumps, I don't think anyone at the slip region or in the gully could sleep when Rishabh Pant is wicket keeping. So, those kind of things absolutely do matter. मुझे याद है the India-England test match in Chennai, which we lost in 21. Even though the wickets weren't falling for England, Joe Root scored that incredible 100. Rishabh Pant was at it from ball 1 to over 90. I mean, he was right there trying to motivate the fielders, trying to get the bowlers going. And that kind of a thing really does matter when you're playing for some 7-8 hours straight in a day.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Rahul, for joining us and giving us insights about the Indian team makeup. This is me, Amit Kamath, saying goodbye on behalf of myself and my co-host Mihir Vasavda. See you next time. Thank you for listening in.
You were listening to Express Sports by the Indian Express. This week's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.